I see more and more companies changing human capital to people, basing what we do in the broader definition of what it takes to be human in the workplace, and how can we preserve, protect, and enhance the humanity of people working in various types of organizations. And now what we're seeing is with the agents that are coming in and AI coaches that do not involve people, but allow for even the most basic level of coaching. The sooner we can support people in their socialization, in how they work in organizations, I think it's going to lift the burden from the managers who are expected to be both managing the work and coaching employees and advising them, which is an impossible. Are you comfortable talking to your manager and disclosing what your issues might be? Or are you more comfortable talking to sort of impersonal AI, even though they do have personalities, but knowing exactly that is going no way. This is particular coach is working for you, and nothing is going to be disclosed. There's no power distance between talking to a manager or talking to an AI coach.
When we think about the future of work and the significant role HR plays, what comes to mind? How can you truly unlock the potential of every individual in the workplace? I'm Tim, and welcome to Future Work, the podcast for HR professionals navigating the fast-changing world of work. Each episode equips you with the insights and tools to lead today and prepare for what's next. Today, I'm chatting with Anna Tavis, Chair of the Human Capital Management Department at New York University and author of multiple books, including The Digital Coaching Revolution and Humans at Work, the art and practice of creating the hybrid workplace. Anna explains why personalization is key to the future of HR and how to start making changes today, from AI-driven tools that offer real-time employee support to creating a more inclusive, human-centered workplace. We explore how personalized strategies can help organizations thrive in the evolving world of work. Have a listen.
This episode of Future Work is brought to you by Tactic. Does your hybrid office feel like chaos? Who's in the office? Where are they sitting? What meeting rooms are available? Luckily, I have a solution for you. Tactic is the #1 rated space logistics platform used by customers like Microsoft, Redbull, the United Nations, and Northwestern University to create order out of chaos. Tactic has a 100% customer satisfaction score on G2 because it was built from the ground up with the end user in mind. It's an all-in-one solution for hot desking, room reservations, and visitor management. Visit gettactic.com/work and start your free trial today. Thanks so much to the Tactic team for sponsoring this episode. And now onto the podcast.
Well, Anna, it's a pleasure to have you on the FlexOS podcast. I know you are an expert in all things human capital management, as well as a breadth of other topics. But today, it's top of mind for me is our human capital management, especially when we think of that future of work. But before we get into it, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll dive into the conversation.
Thank you, Tim. I am right now the chair of the Human Capital Management Department at New York University. This is kind of a rebound into academia after 15 years of working in technology companies and on Wall Street in the senior talent roles. So I do have both kind of an academic research perspective as well as good operational experience of what it means to run an HR, talent organization for major companies in key sectors like technology and financial services. So I approach what I do with empathy at the same time with really clear-eyed understanding of what's involved and how important it is for us, especially in those industries now, to be at the decision table with my colleagues from all other functions in organization. So I take it very seriously, and I'm delighted that I've been given an opportunity to raise the next generation of HR leaders in a spirit of that kind of leadership, creating a leadership position for them from the get-go in organizations.
Well, before we even hit record, you had asked a great question, which is, what are some of the themes that are emerging? And it's just that HR as seen as a leader and not as a cost center, but as a value add to an organization. Before we get into the conversation, I think it's worth defining human capital management so we could kind of lay the foundation of the conversation for the next 30 minutes or so. So how do you define human capital management?
Okay, excellent question. I think we can definitely get all twisted around the semantics of what it actually means. But, many people have told you we started in personnel, staff, and other types of what I consider pejorative names for what we're doing. Human capital, I'm not happy with the title. I think it goes back to our very strong legacy in being a cost center and being an asset that is really evaluated in financial terms. We remember times when HR reported into the CFO or chief operating officer, and I think that's kind of the legacy name for ourselves. Going forward, I see more and more companies changing human capital to people, basing what we do in the broader definition of what it takes to be human in the workplace and how can we preserve, protect, and enhance the humanity of people working in various types of organizations. So I think we're going to see an evolution from all of the titles that we were known by in terms of how our remit is expanding, changing, and adjusting to the changing workplace.
Well, I love that. What it takes to be human. It's just scribble that down on a note. And I think if somebody's listening, maybe bookmark that little piece right there is what does it mean to be human in an organization? Just doing a little bit of research for the episode and finding some different definitions online. It's like, it used to be mainly administrative, right? And I think organizations still see HR as administrative. A lot of organizations bring in an HR person when they're 60 or 100 people, and because it's seen as, we need to do more. But if we actually think of it as our people management, how do we extract the most out of our people? Maybe that's not the right language. How do we create spaces where people can perform? To me, is how we create human capital management systems and strategies around that. And so based on your current role and where you've been in your career, what are some of the trends that you have seen, and where do you see this idea of human capital management going into the next year or two or three?
I think the most important and foundational shift that we are experiencing, and it's only going to gain momentum in 25 and ongoing, is to make a pivot to much more personalized services that organizations will need to deliver to their employees. We kind of started out with the overall kind of generalized staff, people, associates, et cetera, undifferentiated mass managed by a few middle managers executing on the directives from the top of the organization, a very hierarchical way of looking. Now we kind of moved into talent management, which was the last century still, and of the last century. Talent management meant we're going to identify A players, we're going to assess and understand who the actual top performers are. There has been a whole infrastructure created around high potential development and special programs, et cetera, et cetera. And I put the early stages of DEI into that space where let's identify certain groups that we need to cultivate, et cetera, et cetera. So we did accomplish a few things, but then we started moving toward a much more inclusive environment, like when we started talking about employee experience. And that was also connected to technology when we were able to actually get tools And this is where the rise of people analytics, for example, in organizations started to deliver to us that kind of much more laser focused, much more precise, almost like the invention of an X-ray, of understanding of what are the movements within the organization. We started talking about the life cycle, and we moved away from satisfaction survey, I like it, I don't like it, to a much more fine-tuned way of understanding what kind of engineering, what are the patterns in employee commitment, loyalty, etc. And I think we are transitioning away from that phase when we still kind of cherry picked who we want to pay attention to a much more inclusive way of looking at employees, where we're going to be delivering services in a personalized way at all levels in the organization. We are not able to do it without the help of AI. We are going to be able, from the entry level to the very top of the organization, provide, and this is my area of research, coaching and support and development and et cetera to the employees throughout their stay in their organization, and even pre and post, as well as, from the inclusion perspective, as Tim, you and I discussed. I think we're going to grow out of a very narrow definition of diversity into a much more inclusive space where we're going to understand differences among employees. Again, cherry pick which groups we're going to prioritize, but really help everyone rise with the support of the organization, because it's only natural for us to be human. And again, and it wasn't possible, and I'm not saying that we're deficient in something. We just did not have the tools and capacity to be able to operate at that level. Now we do. And I think it's going to create a fundamental shift in how HR is positioned in organization, how it's being viewed, and what roles HR professionals are going to play in the future work.
It's that theme I think that's emerging right now, is that personalization, and I've heard that from a few others now on the show. That personalized, maybe it's total rewards, or that personalized environment that somebody works in. And maybe listeners will agree as well, as from an HR perspective, we want to create spaces for people to perform at their best. I think any CEO would agree with that. Any C-suite would say yes, right? We've got this big workforce. We need them to perform at the best. And then if we think about personalization, if I put on my budget hat for a moment, I think, oh man, this is going to be expensive. How do I do this? I agree with it. Just practically how? Where do I start? Maybe you're in a company of 10 people. Maybe you're in a company of 5,000 people. What do you do? What's your thoughts on how do we get started in this idea of personalization?
Mm-hmm. Excellent question. And let me give you a practical illustration of what I am seeing as a trend. Most recently I published a book on digital coaching, and I've been looking at the evolution of coaching from, the time of COVID, when coaching platforms were brought in that allowed for at least the middle management or certain levels in the organization to have access to coaches who became available through the platforms and on a Zoom call, on a video, et cetera, that drove down the cost of coaching and also made coaches available to employees, at different, more convenient times, et cetera, because of the overhead of going to the office and setting up meetings, et cetera, was significantly reduced. So that's where it started. And if you think of traditional coaching, it was only available, again, in the talent management phase of HR to the top level of the organization. Because it was very white glove executive coach who would brought in on a retainer contract for 6 months to work with a particular executive who was delivering but didn't have the personality and the skills to be managing organizations. That's how it was done. You take the costs of that executive intervention, which usually, again, was a fixing of some, behavioral issues for the executives, take the cost of that and distribute it among a lot more people through these platforms. And now what we're seeing is with the agents that are coming in, AI coaches that do not involve people, but allow for even the most basic level of coaching through a personalized AI agent that is trained on your habits, on your lifestyle, on the workflow, and could be integrated in the flow of work, what you're doing, connecting to your calendar, understanding what your particular job description is, etc. And so this is so cost effective. Again, it's just transferring what the organization has been using for top executives. And quite a few organizations might still continue with that executive coaching program, but the availability of these types of agents at all levels in organization, I usually tell people, and my favorite company is Valence, for example, Canadian, by the way, Canadian company, and I use whose name is Nadia, who speaks to me. It's a voice-enabled coach. I won't probably talk about very complicated issues, but a lot of general type of questions. If that particular AI is trained on the company values, company policies, company performance management goals, et cetera, a lot of those questions could be answered 24/7 at the time when the employee needs it. And my theory of the case and what I'm seeing across the board is if those types of support systems are put in from the very beginning of employee engagement or employee onboarding with the company, we might, Tim, not necessarily need a fixing at a much higher cost and lower return, honestly, on that executive coaching at the end of this journey. The sooner we can support people in their socialization in how they work in organizations, I think it's going to lift the burden from the managers who are expected to be both managing the work and coaching employees and advising them, which is an impossible, oftentimes, a role to play in organization, a huge conflict there oftentimes. So we're going to be able to support employees from the get-go. One more point about this personalization and availability and the cost effectiveness of these particular interventions is if you ask most of the employees, even in the smaller or mid-sized organizations, most of them don't know who their HR people are. I go and I lecture in executive education programs where you have mid-level and aspiring and high potential managers who come in, and I ask them, have you talked to your HR people? They don't even know who HR are because they're too busy managing the top level of the organization, and the rest of it is usually an outsourced call center. So imagine a shift to a personalized, trained on the company, policies, et cetera, and then also fine-tuned to your particular needs coach that is available 24/7, and how much more support people will get and how many issues could be prevented and addressed way before they become a real problem for companies to solve.
There's so much coming up for me right now, and I try to dissect some of my thoughts in this, and it's still grounded in that definition of human capital management. Like that to me is setting this foundation, right? When we think of optimizing our workforce, optimizing productivity, that's a real operational term. We need to optimize. My background, I've got a bit of operations, business operations. When I hear that, it's, okay, how do we get the most out of the things in our environment? And so when I'm hearing this idea of these AI coaches, I love it, because what's coming up for me is, what is that cost of lack of productivity, lack of competency, lack of skill? It might be, a leader might be listening and go, well, if they're not competent for the role, or if they don't have the skill, we just have to let them go. Well, there's a massive cost to this, to recruit, to retrain, the cost just on the culture of as well, because maybe you're creating that culture of fear. So if you're listening to this and maybe you are trying to make that business case, I think you need to really start there is, well, what does it cost to hire, quote unquote, a digital coach, an AI coach? What does it cost to have an ineffective employee in your organization? And look at that, because I think the results are going to surprise you. I think you're going to see, wow, if we embrace these AI tools, maybe we'll actually increase performance. And I would say start small. You don't need to start with everyone in your organization now has half an hour every day or every couple of days to start retraining. What would you suggest? I know this is that area of expertise that you have, but say somebody's like, yeah, I love this. I want to bring this into my call center or bring this into our manufacturing team or whatever team it is. How do we start?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of these companies. I certainly would want for my colleagues in HR to research big names out there and smaller. There's a huge ecosystem of various providers right now. My favorites are the Valence that I use myself, and there's BetterUp, there's Ezra, there's Coach Hub. There are multiple companies that provide services. Some of them have specific preferences and kind of more a specialty, and they're fairly cost effective, as I said, given the volume of coaching that happens. And it's not at all. I think the beauty of this is it's built into the workflow. If you take 15 minutes, like my check-ins with my coach Nadia from Valence, we're 15 minutes a day, once a week. That's because I have continuity, train the coach to understand what I need, and like 15 minutes just to reminders, check-ins, and again, unlike chatbots or search engines or whatever, these particular tools are trained on you. They have memory, and you can really and empathy to a certain extent of what you're going through. So I think starting with research, looking at what other companies are doing, just to kind of get oriented and grounded, but at the same time doing a really analysis of what would be your potential application and a use case. Most companies start with smaller. They start with pilots. Choose a segment of your population where you want to try this out. And I'm working with a couple of companies right now on research, understanding, what the adoption issues might be, et cetera. But so far, it's really incredible. There's very little resistance to these coaches. People think that there's a trust issue and people would want, to speak to a human rather than address a coach. And that's absolutely not the case. We actually ran a little pilot for our students with one of those companies, and we found that quite a few actually preferred to get a quick response if they needed something from an AI rather than have to chase down a human down the hallway, not knowing exactly if the human has the answer, first of all, and the second, what kind of mood they're going to be. And I think there are also, in certain situations, a trust issue. If you're considering changing your career or you have some issues in the workplace, etc., are you comfortable talking to your manager and disclosing what your issues might be? Or are you more comfortable talking to sort of impersonal AI, even though they do have personalities, but knowing exactly that is going no way. This particular coach is working for you, and nothing is going to be disclosed. There's no power distance between talking to a manager or talking to an AI coach. And there's a trust issue, especially with certain demographics. We are finding more junior employees oftentimes feel a lot more comfortable discussing these types of and playing out different scenarios. The important thing about these coaches is they're not telling you what to do. They're just offering you options and offering you maybe different ways of thinking about your situation. So my recommendation, two different potential user groups. One, for individuals, try it out. Even working with your chat GPT as a potential coach, checking out and see what the feedback might come back. And again, the coaching systems are a lot more in tune to coaching. ChatGPT is more generic. And then for at the organizational level, try certain work units and see where it fits most. Some people are using it for onboarding. Let's try, all of the employees, instead of sending people on a HR lecture about the policies and health benefits and all the other things, and have somebody lecture to them. And then, I don't know, Tim, if you remember, everyone gets a folder of the policies. You have a coach that can go through this in minutes if you have specific issues about your PTO and your vacations and your health support options and wellness, et cetera. And I think try that. Onboarding, easy. Some companies are trying it to support middle management. Others are using it in performance management because, for example, performance management, everyone is going through the cycle of setting goals. How many repeatable questions do HR answer? And at the time, or email, annoying emails that come your way. And some of the interesting uses of the coaching systems are in change management. We know one company that introduced next generation leadership values, and they're using these coaches to personalize of how people are discussing what it means to them at a personal level, rather than, again, getting a corporate email that says, here are our new, or whatever, the cards that you have to memorize and remember these values, and they just become a poster on the wall, rather than, what does it mean to me? And you can have that exchange with your coach. So multiple use cases, and there's enough experience right now to really look into, to think about how this type of personalization could be brought into your organization.
There's a lot in there. I love how you described it in a very practical way, and even an implementation plan. And so if you're listening to this, maybe you're just feeling, okay, this is something that we can start on, right? Again, grounded in that definition. We need to optimize productivity, optimize our workforce. How do we do this? Yeah, imagine getting real-time feedback. I don't know how many times throughout my career sat at my desk and went, I don't know what to do with this. And you look around and your colleagues are busy, your manager's gone. And so you sit there for an hour or two spinning your wheels going, I don't know. I just don't know. And I've looked for the answer and I just can't figure this out. But having a coach to maybe reframe it, or an AI engine within your organization to say, hey, I'm stuck on this. What have we done in the past? It feeds you some information. And yeah, sense check it, right? You still might need to validate that that's correct, but how much quicker, how much more productivity will we see when we embrace this in our workforces and within our teams? And, this idea of personalization, that personalization support, is there one more thing or another thing that you're seeing a trend on, or something that we just need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, and I think another interesting aspect of it, you and I discussed, is kind of expanding our understanding of diversity and inclusion, making it work, because at the end of the day, and we all know that the only way this is going to work is if everyone feels that their particular issues are addressed. And if we're just looking at these big groups and thinking in terms of these, categories, and kind of stereotyping people into them, we're seeing it everywhere right now, where, for example, our colleagues with, Latin American descent from are saying, don't call us Latinx, or whatever. We don't like this kind of big, broad generalization. We are all coming with our specific cultures. And as you talk to people who, and I'm talking about the US environment, and I think it applies everywhere, like you take Asia, and everyone, there's no such thing as an Asian. There are people coming from so many different backgrounds and varieties of experiences, etc. So I think it's for the first time that we're able to, really understand what these different, much more nuanced, categories are about and what's needed. And we are going to be able to scale inclusion in a much more effective and sensitive and empathetic way than what we've been doing before. And, understandably, there was a big backlash that we are now trying to understand and recover from. Even though I think all the intentions were really, really good, it's such a sensitive area as diversity. We need to go a lot more granular, a lot more nuanced. And I think we're getting there, and technology is going to help us do that.
What I often say on my other show, so I spend some time in the disability inclusion space, is, we're all uniquely different. My normal is different than your normal. And so when we try and create workplaces that are all the same, is it going to work for everyone? And what we're seeing is no, it doesn't. What I'm hearing in this is that personalization is if we actually, as an organization, really clearly define where we're going, our vision, our mission, our values. What are our goals for this year? What are our goals for this quarter? How does that trickle down into me as an individual contributor? How do I impact those goals? And then we're now focused on that individual rather than saying, hey, we're trying to hit X number of revenue. It's like, no, Tim, Anna, this is how you're going to help contribute. This is how this role is going to help contribute to this. Are you in? Are you excited? Then now we can say, yeah, I'm all in. But maybe I am not able to sit for long periods of time, or maybe I need this accommodation, or maybe I don't celebrate these national holidays, but I celebrate these ones. To me, it's, and this doesn't work for all organizations or all teams, but okay, so what do we need to do to create a space where you can perform? Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's that physical environment. That's, I feel, is where HR really needs to not just be an advocate, but a driver for change. And you want to talk about disability inclusion? I know we talked about that before we hit record. I've got data, so much data to support why it's important. The same goes across all aspects of diversity and inclusion. So, Anna, there's some very practical things from an HR perspective that we can start doing today to ensure that we are competitive for tomorrow and in the future. As we look to wrap up, is there a thought that you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I think that we as HR have to be prepared to really become much more engaged, involved in this whole personalization of work trend, movement, to really help our organizations to get there faster. Because I do think that it's also a question of competitive advantage. Companies that are going to be, we started a little bit there with like hybrid, flexible, remote, that conversation persists. But that's a precursor to a much greater differentiation and ability to accommodate our employees. So I think it will, to your earlier point, will translate into better productivity, being the best place to work, where you're going to be attracting very diverse talent and leveraging people who were, left out of this kind of cookie cutter resume crunching earliest stage, impersonal computers who were excluding people for no reason at all. And so I think that understanding your organization's path to making it a people focused, or what we call human centered organization, in very practical terms. We've done enough high level training and presentations on this topic. Now we have the ability and the tools to translate it into redesigning the entire HR infrastructure to be run on the personalization engine. And to the extent that we can do it in an effective way, I think we're going to contribute significantly to our organization's success, to our organization's ability to transition into the AI phase of, technology transformation with a minimal, damage that, to people in your organization. So I think that is, that should be the objective, that should be the goal for all of us in the HR profession.
Well, there you go. There you have it. If you're listening, the idea of personalization has to happen. And again, that seems to be a trend over the last few episodes. And when we think about the future of work and the future of HR, that's where we're headed. Creating spaces for everyone to thrive. Anna, it's a pleasure having you on. If somebody is curious to read your book, to track you down, to learn more, where can people find you?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. This is kind of where all HR congregates, and we share. People used to have websites, etc. Now, it's much more effective to just post something, where you are, what you've published, what kind of research you're doing. It's all there. That's the commons, the public square where we all congregate. And I want to invite everyone to join me. Thank you so much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks again. And we'll make sure we put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. And for those who are listening, I appreciate you for tuning in, for being curious about what the future of work looks like and where we can support not just ourselves, but our organizations in the future of work through the lens of HR. Thanks for tuning in, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode. Subscribe to the newsletter. Head to flexos.work to do so. So with that, I hope everyone has an amazing day. That's it for this episode of Future Work. Join me next week for an exciting conversation with Jess Von Bank. Jess, a global leader in HR transformation, technology advisory, and is the driving force behind the Now of Work community at Mercer. We'll dive into from recruiter to talent strategist, technology, personalization, and human connection, uncovering how these elements shape the future of talent. Don't miss out. To get notifications of new episodes, sign up to the Future Work newsletter at flexos.work/futurework.